I could be right, I could be wrong. It hurts so bad, it's been so long. Mama, I'm coming home.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Brennan. You are attending the webinar today for Practical Cybersecurity. And today is the World Password Day. So a perfect day to talk about practical solutions that are out there. I am your speaker. My name is again Tom Brennan. I'm the founder of Proactive Risk. My background is a little diverse. I have a big background in financial services and then working for various service providers. And then recently I had launched a company called Proactive Risk to provide those services to clients directly. So we work with lots of folks in the financial services district, online gambling, online casinos, and also in the pharmaceutical space. So today's presentation is going to focus on a couple different areas. We're going to kick this off with a little introduction to kind of get you thinking about software and software security. We're going to talk a little about being or thinking evil and doing good, and with also observations and recommendations based on years of experience in providing various services from incident response through penetration testing. At the end, we'll do some Q&A. You are able to utilize the GoToWebinar questions to submit your questions live. During the breaks, if you will, of the talk, I'll stop and grab some questions, and then at the end we will summarize and any other Q&A that's there. So let's get started, shall we? So every day in the news, it appears there's some sensationalism about some new breach. And the breaches that are happening every day are getting more and more commonplace. And in some cases, folks are even getting numb to them, a lot of the consumers or the people that are affected by them. But there's also a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So I wanted to try and spend some time shedding some light on some practical solutions and some practical things that people can do to fight better. So let's start off by thinking evil for a second. If you look at a light bulb, let's imagine for a moment that you walk into a room, and in the middle of the room, hanging from the ceiling, is a single light bulb. Can you come up with a couple ways to shut the light bulb off? Right? If you think about this, take 30 seconds and think of a couple solutions that you might go ahead and think about shutting off the bulb or shutting off the light. You might consider finding or walking over and hitting the switch. That might be the easiest one to do. Perhaps you want to take off your shoe and throw it at it and break the bulb. Perhaps you want to wrap your hand on a cloth and then maybe touch it and unscrew it. Or you might even ask somebody else to do it for you. You can get more elaborate into the conversation, but really what I'm shooting at here is different ways to solve the same problem. And sort of with the way technology works, it's supposed to be an enabler for business, right? So the concept is security should certainly be the brakes on the car and not the car. So as you look at other sort of solutions that may have played out in your mind, some of these could be out of the box, such as cause a power failure in the building, or don't pay the electric bill, or even just close your eyes and make the light go black. So there's lots of ways to potentially solve the same problem. I'm hoping that we're going to talk through a few of these today. The most common question, of course, is can someone hack my system? Is my system sort of available to be breached? And if so, how does this really work? But I'd like to make sure that people understand that there's a couple components of this that must happen. The bad guy, I typically wear a bad guy hat when I do my work. In the bad guy world, there's a couple components that are really important, particularly 4 of them. The first thing is, as the bad guy, I must get into the environment, right? Somehow, some way. This could be through electronic attack, right? Meaning an offensive approach to looking at, let's say, your public-facing endpoints. It may be looking at individuals within the organization and either social engineering your way through, meaning face-to-face, or perhaps targeting them directly with, let's say, a phishing email, or getting some sort of toehold within the organization. Once you're within the organization, and you might have to agree with me that it's not that complex to find one weakness in a castle, but once you have identified a weakness and have a toehold within the environment, you then are either brought into the environment, perhaps on a USB key, perhaps through a planted employee that's going to provide remote access for a fee, or perhaps you're going to look at a web application that's public facing, determine that there may be some user unvalidated input, and be able to provide commands on the box or control the system. But once you're inside the system, you must be able to propagate. You must be able to move from one system to the next. being able to start with your toehold with your first system, again, could be an individual's laptop, could be the receptionist's machine, could be the public-facing web application, the mail server, whatever it may be. But then you must propagate from within that organization, system to system, and of course do it undetected. If you were to be detected during this process, perhaps your attack would be shut down, and you would basically have to go scratch your head and figure out another way in the front door. Once you propagate from system to system looking for the treasure, so let's take the example of the cure for cancer, or let's take the example of a merger and acquisition data in, let's say, a law firm, or perhaps some financial account data, or even PCI cardholder data that's stored on a local system, whatever it may be. But being able to move from system to system and then be able to get to the defined treasure of the attack, what was the purpose of the act, that's again really critical. We can think of the conversation that's in the news every day about the advanced persistent threat, and I kind of smirk about that and say the advanced persistent threat is the old guys in the room, right? Or even the new guys in the room that have had serious talent exposure. The point of it is that sitting down with a bunch of your teammates in an organization and thinking about what's the worst that could happen. Well, you are the APT, and being persistent and being a threat can come from all different sides. Lastly, after the data has been aggregated, after you've received or have the information that you were looking for, you must then get out. Again, think of it from a military operation, right? A little reconnaissance first, you got to do your insertion, you got to find where you want to be, and then you need to get out of the environment. These things are all critically important to the operation. So let's go through some observations based on some past events, past breaches that I've been a part of that might be able to tell a little bit of a story in sort of a reverse role. It's my opinion that if you look at the end result and work backwards, hence reverse engineering, perhaps you'll be able to fight better. So the first symptom potentially of a compromise inside an organization, and this morning we learned of a new one. This morning's breach that popped up on the news wire, of course, was was a casino, and the casino has had its organization breached. And of course, this organization or this casino called Firekeepers, perhaps the bad guys, or quote unquote the criminals, really did hit the jackpot, right? They went to a casino to find their to find their data or to find their treasure. So perhaps symptom number one may be unusual account activity based on known behaviors of account holders. Again, think of this logically. If you have an organization of one person or 100 people or 100,000 people, everybody has a social sort of profile, right? They come to work usually around the same time. They perhaps log into a system. They do certain activities. Perhaps they check their emails. They run through their the latest greatest sports scores, whatever it may be. But they have some basic activity. So let's think about this for a second. At 2 o'clock in the morning, if the user did not swipe into the building, assuming that there's some sort of access control, and this machine became active and started to harvest or collect or download or exfiltrate data, perhaps that might be one indicator of a behavior of the account holder, which is not normal. So being able to detect and look at what's normal is critically important. Now, lots of things happen in any organizational business side, but being able to look at sort of the flow of what normal is a good place to start. Unexplained outbound activity. Again, as mentioned, if that system is reaching out at an unexpected time and doing unexpected connections, it can really certainly lead to a conversation of why. And just by being able to intercept or understand or know, this is a very important process of looking at what is known behavior, and then anything that's known behavior can at least be put on a non-suspect list, where you then would investigate outbound activities from a particular system and be able to look at how that might impact an organization, meaning outbound communication that potentially could be harmful. Symptom number 3 could be considered creation of files, right? You would think this would be pretty straightforward, that if you have a known environment, if you know sort of what your known behaviors are, and you are looking for any abnormalities in the environment, if there was to be a system that was to create, meaning on your file system that is, if there was to be a directory created or files created, this could be an indicator, of course, that the system has had some sort of change. that change may have been a breach or may have been access to the device. And of course, putting software on the machine, aka badware. These tools, these scripts, these executables, perhaps could be accessing the machine in a way it wasn't designed for, or could be simply a location that it's more of a jumping point. So understanding what your directory structures look like, what they should look like, being able to understand where your log files should be stored, what applications are there, and being able to confirm or deny that you're in a clean state. Because how do you then roll back in the event of a breach to a known good state without knowing kind of where you came from? Now, as complex as this may sound, it's not overly difficult to establish a baseline within an environment. I'll use a point of sale system as a simple example. If you were to create a point of presence system that is going to be there for processing and transactions, it's configured in an environment that's clean, and at that point you assume that you have a standardized image. You then would be able to go ahead and ascertain sort of the directory structures and how things should be set up. As that machine then gets locked down for its purpose, you would then be able to establish sort of the baseline. Make sense? So geographic origin, right? This is actually a pretty hot topic these days, where we look at the ability to be attacked from anywhere in the world, right? We're connected to the internet, and in most cases, most organizations are kind of open front door to anyone out there that wants to come knock on their front end. And although they may be let's say a hospitality chain that is serviced by a third party, that third party perhaps may only be in a particular state. They would not necessarily need access to remote administration or remote access from anywhere else in the world. So instead of having a source destination rule, perhaps from the source IP of the third party or a site-to-site VPN, they decide to allow remote access to happen, but allow it to happen from anywhere in the world. And that just basically ups the game, right? Ups the game, allowing anyone from anywhere to connect to a system to attempt to brute force it or fight their way through the access controls, which are trying to prevent access. So if you don't have a way to look at what's a known standardized sort of way to interact with your environment, even though you have folks that may travel, even though you may have systems that may be on the perimeter that are used for exactly that purpose, like an SSL VPN or perhaps a OWA, public-facing Microsoft mail server. These public-facing systems, it's really important to go through them and determine if, in fact, they have, if they have had any sort of abnormality of access that is there. Why would somebody, simply attack your box or connect to your machine from a country location that you may not be aware of? And then, of course, there's always things like anonymizers, things like Tor exit nodes and other tools that are used to help anonymize the end user. And in fact, you need to make a business decision. Is this something that's needed from business perspective? Are you okay with an individual accessing a system in your corporate environment coming through a known anonymizer? If so, then that would be a policy process that you then need to do additional controls. But if you were able to kind of think about this for a moment and say, well, wait a second, we don't think there's a legitimate business reason why someone would want to anonymize themselves in our company to come in for remote mail. So perhaps you want to drop, any sort of anonymizers sort of at that endpoint. Unexplained system changes to the Windows registry. Now, this might go hand in hand with files on the machine that weren't intended, but this is a little bit different and more Windows specific. In many cases, setting reg words or strings within the Windows registry are going to allow things after they've been rebooted to continue. So therefore, perhaps putting things into debugging mode is a good example. A lot of times when applications are used for processing, again, we can look at a processing like either a credit card system would be a good example there, or perhaps a document management system. Putting these things into debugging mode allows them to write out a separate file. So depending on the products or tools that are being used by the normal course of business, perhaps setting some registry changes would put the application into debugging mode. Perhaps it would write out a log file. Perhaps the log file has data that can be accessed that would contain data from the target or that you're trying to obtain. Number 6, attempts to tamper log evidence. Being able to modify archives is a pretty big issue. If you would agree with me that it would be nice to have a nice little chain of events where you have time synchronization with all your systems to a centralized location and you have sort of a flow. If you keep this retention data for, let's say, a year, maybe 6 months, maybe a month, maybe enough to protect your business assets, if you have this sort of historical reference, as an attacker, what do I want to do to step on my footprint so that people don't know who I was when I was there? Of course, my last hurrah is probably to identify the logging system and disrupt it. Now, this may be as simple as me conducting a denial of service against the device during my attack sequence, so there is no log that can be recorded, and I truly don't modify or access the logging system. I just disrupt the communication flow, because in many cases, it's UDP files being sent over that are going to attract log correlation data. But again, look at your logs, look at your controls there, and kind of come up with a conversation of, okay, if you were to go ahead and circumvent this system, what indicators of compromise may you have? And what would be the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of this logging system? Because again, this is a huge target within an organization to cover tracks. Number 7. Antivirus, as many of us would agree, in a world that we can write software, we can compile it with a custom packer, it can have a unique signature, it can kind of be its own thing that AV will not pick up or detect, and then launch an attack. And in many cases, the wisdom of crowds plays a great role here. Antivirus and anti-malware solutions that are deployed as part of doing normal business these days, these products are very, very useful because, of course, you're hoping that another organization has seen a similar abnormality or has seen a signature that is now detectable, so that therefore, if you're an organization in, I don't know, Michigan, and a company similar to yours was attacked in a way in Texas, well, perhaps that 30 days that went by is going to help your AV or anti-malware solution, sort of pop alerts or give some sort of indication of a problem. So again, an attacker's perspective is always to take these systems out, right? Always to go ahead and try to put them into a decapacitated component where that perhaps I want to exclude directories or locations that the AV or the malware tools are going to look for, meaning put them on an exclude list. Perhaps I want to just go ahead and disrupt the service. And disrupt the service could just bring down the tool altogether. And in some cases, that'll probably kick an alert back to the central control. But again, depending on what's identified and what type of product it is, each is an individual sort of discussion. So being somewhat vendor neutral there. So to my point about service activity, being able to identify when these activities happen, a service goes down, and the question is why? All organizations, all product vendors, all people that write software, their intent is to write something that's sustainable and it's going to withstand against typical attack or organization sort of disruption. But more importantly, they're not in a business of making tools that are unstable. So if you have a product, wherever it may be, that's running from Joe Blow vendor, if that service is disrupted, there's usually a good reason why. And not having root cause or not being able to spend the time to figure out what that little blip was on the radar, that could be your entry point that you missed. So again, thinking backwards, think of this symptom of how would you detect this today in your current environment, and do you have the either tools or the process in place to be able to audit this? It may sound simple when it's one machine, but when it's managing a 50,000 person environment, it does take a little bit of time and energy to go ahead and create a system that scales to do exactly the same thing as you would do in a single box. So symptom 9 then plays into that discussion. Unexplained downtime. Again, systems that are going to unexpectedly reboot do happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but what I'm saying is that when you see a workstation or a server that's processing payment or a certificate box or some authentication tool, when these sensitive systems have an unexplained blip on the radar from an uptime or reliability perspective, perhaps there's more there than you're really getting keyed into. Because again, in some cases, in some situations, to be persistent, These sometimes require recycling of services. Sometimes these require a reinitialization of the machine. And in some cases, those attack techniques even cause systems to unexpectedly reboot or even blue screen back in the day, right? So now when you see these blips on your radar, it's really important to understand, well, how do these actually affect me? And how does this unexplained downtime perhaps lead to something else? There's tons of stories in the news, recent breaches from years and years ago, and things that have happened probably today that would cause you to look at various areas within the environment as to what the downtime could have been. Was it an availability problem? Perhaps the availability problem, was really not so much a system breach, but perhaps it was just an overutilization of a circuit or a connection, or the inability to handle 20,000 users on a system at the same time, and it coughs. But again, trying to get down to root causes is kind of critical here. Number 10 is unexplained administrative console access. It's not uncommon whether you're inside of the environment or outside of the environment, and to me, everything's hostile, so there is no perimeter anymore. There is no castle gates, right? You're either inside or you're not, meaning that the organization believes it's an internal application only. However, they usually fail to understand or look at the reality that what is internal is also accessible externally, especially when you have users accessing these systems and their devices perhaps are already compromised. And again, this is a very general statement, of course, because you have different types of environments, right, based on risk postures, right? There's organizations that are very proud of running an enclave environments, like we do in the government sector, as well as being able to look at, hey, we need the ability for our folks to work from anywhere using their own devices because we're lowering our cost of, employee device ownership, etc. But this becomes an important discussion. Unauthorized administrative console access, it could be something as simple as going to a web server on a control port like 8080 and having that port be accessible to everybody inside the environment, even though there's only 3 people in the company that would ever need to access that instance or that control session through a control port. So again, it comes down to understanding your environment, taking the time to sort of whiteboard out, well, who needs access to this? What's the attack surface look like? And then trying your best to stay on top of these things. And again, in a large environment, by no means do I say it's easy, but with the same due diligence that you would take upon knowing where your windows and doors are in your house and who has your alarm codes, it's probably the same conversation of kind of correlating that back to technology if you're new to the space. So what do you do? Right? What do you do if somebody punches you in the face? This is typically, I think, where textbooks don't mean anything, except maybe for reference, and it really comes down to experience. If you've never been punched in the face, you really don't know how you're going to react. So if you follow sort of the analogy of, train like you fight, fight like you train, the conversation becomes, okay, well, how do we play Battleship? When we walk into a local coffee shop or some other place that has, wireless, like a conference, and we happen to connect to the wireless access point because we have some stuff to do, and we start looking on the network neighborhood or browsing what's broadcasting itself on the environment, we see lots of other machines perhaps. Well, that inter-client communication means Battleship just started, right? You're now accessible, at least without any sort of VLAN hopping or any sort of wireless manipulation, to be directly communicating with the guy across the room. At that point, the guy across the room could be anybody, and we get down to the human aspect of this. If I'm running tools, and tools are indiscriminate, that they're going to run across a network and they're going to scan, looking for devices of perhaps looking for banners or looking for information that's there, and then take actions based on what it sees, meaning like auto-pwn and like a Metasploit. The point is that if you don't know the environment that you're running into and you're plugging yourself in, Battleship is happening. I always get a good kick out of every year when I go to DEF CON, spend some good time with my friends, and folks look to use an operationally secure environment, and everyone's, well, I ain't taking my laptop out. No way, I can't operate in this environment. It's too crazy. There's a lot of people here. 10,000 hackers showed up in Vegas this year. Well, what makes that any different from a coffee shop? What makes that any different from a conference that's, let's say, for, I don't know, pharmaceuticals or for online gaming or law enforcement? Going to these centralized conferences is a great attack point. It's a great place to go learn as an attacker what's possible. What would happen if you went to, again, insert industry, you went to an industry-focused conference and happened to learn that the wireless at that conference was insecure, and be able to take advantage of all those attendees, being able to put a foothold on all those devices and be able to go ahead and allow yourself to have perhaps persistent access to all of these companies from one central conference? That's typically how the attacker's mindset works, is how can I do the most amount of access with the least amount of opportunity to get caught, so the return on investment for the attacker is not getting arrested. So here's some practical solutions I wanted to point out that are available for you today. These are things that you can do it yourself, and I think that practical security is really important because it really starts off with what you know, and more importantly, to kind of shake off the boogeyman and focus on things that are actually practical. So there's a couple different organizations out there, and I'll touch on 2 or 3 of them, and then I'm going to dive into some technical areas, so you might want to get a pen and paper. But in summary, the Center for Internet Security, or CIS, that I'm a part of, I'm on their Roles and Controls panel. This is a really good resource for information focused around best practices, benchmarks, and assessment tools. I would highly encourage you to check them out. Lots of good items that can be actionable today, including configuration and assessment tools that'll make a lot of the things I'm going to show you in a slide or two fairly straightforward for you to do yourself. Of course, for those that know me outside of proactive risk, I do a lot with the Open Web Application Security Project. OWASP has been a great resource, and lots of great friendships there. But in summary, it's a place you can operate without an NDA, right? It's a place you can go ahead and work on tooling or discussions or solving problems with peers around the world. About 43,000 people now, with about 220 chapters in different states around the states and countries around the world. And there's some really, really interesting projects there. There's about 100 plus of them now that I highly encourage you to take the time to check out and spend a half hour, read through the descriptions, and you're going to find a few of the ones that might be interesting to you. The ones that are interesting to me start off with the Application Security Verification Standard, or the ASVS, where that any organization that does not understand the risks that are in front of them, this is a good place to start for web application security. Putting things into buckets based on criticality, trying to utilize some best practices by experts around the world that agree on something, and that by itself is unique. But the idea is that businesses are looking for your guidance as a security professional, and OWASP has helped kind of centralize that information as a best practice, so it's well worth taking a look at. If you're involved in application security for more than a day, you probably have heard about the OWASP Top 10. I do want to point out this is the top 10 risks. This is not the top 10 vulnerabilities. It's a common mistake. When we talk about risks, the reason why I stress that is because if you run different types of either languages or frameworks, the OWASP Top 10 may not apply to you in all categories. So in a future version, I personally hope to help out with compartmentalizing it down to different languages. So that you can have a top 10 for X and then Y and Z. I think that would be more useful in the community that I'm trying to sort of help change the world with, for the developer community to say, okay, I'm working on this platform. What are the top 10 risks in this platform? And then have them focus on that. Again, why a top 10, not a top 20? Who knows? It just makes it simple and easy. There's probably about 49 different classes of attack out there, and you can put all of the top 10 into those different buckets. But with new attack types popping up rarely, the top 10 risks is a great place to get a found understanding, grounding in understanding. The developer guide, as stated, it's a developer guide, right? But the idea is people like Andrew Vanderstock has spent an awful lot of his personal time investing in best practices and collaborating with others around the world. That's a really good read that helps kind of establish where folks need to be looking at from a developer perspective in writing secure code. Someone like myself, I come out of a database background. It was very, very helpful for me to understand sort of the database components there. And then more importantly, I really enjoyed the Web Application Testing Guide, which is a how to hack web application sort of document. I started off with an example of how to, and then the process to do it. So myself and a bunch of people, probably 50, 60 people around the world, helped collaborate on this project. It's now in version 4, which was released in January. And if you want to pick something up for free and read through a collective wisdom of crowds, the OWASP testing guide would definitely help draw your attention to how to hack a web application one packet at a time. It also references a lot of other great tools and projects within OWASP, so it's a good place to sort of bring some of these conversations together. Again, I'm highlighting some of these as sort of suggestions to drive the conversation forward. Developer cheat sheets. People like Jim Manico have done a phenomenal job, bringing people together to collaborate on again, very tactical solutions that I'm a big fan of. Being able to quickly jump in and say, I have this problem with password management. I have this problem with crypto management. How do I do these type of things? And have a nice summarized, 1 or 2 or 3 page summarization that would help people drive faster and quicker. Ryan Barnett's working on the HoneyNet project. He's been doing that for a long time. Ryan's a great guy, but more importantly, when you look at the ability to deploy something like a mod security, an open source web application firewall in your environment, think of what you could contribute as a business, right? If you could put reconnaissance posts out on your network and you have, let's say, 1 or 2 extra IP addresses, and you want to learn mod security, you want to learn more about LAMP stack, or you want to learn more about security, perhaps you want to spin up one of the OWASP projects, you want to tap into the OWASP HoneyNet project and provide a tool that's going to be used not only for you to understand and get proactive intelligence around incoming attacks or people that are probing and kicking your network, but perhaps that might help somebody else. I come from that world, and I kind of think that collaboration is good. If you work in an enclave all day long, you won't realize what's happening across the street. So take a look at that project. Simon's done a great job with the Z attack proxy, thanks to the support from Mozilla. This product was built as a QA tool and has advanced itself quite nicely. For some in the space that use proxies regularly, that may remember like using S-Tunnel and Paros back in the day, Zap is a really interesting and useful tool. And certainly it competes head-to-head now with many commercial products or proxies that are out there. So if you like fiddling with application security, don't forget to take a look at the Z attack proxy and use the web application testing guide as your sort of guidance. RFQ criteria product is a product of mine. I worked on this for a large contractor that was trying to put some language into place for the General Services Administration, or the GSA. RFQ criteria is a great project that sort of outlines the type of questions that you might want to include in your RFQs. So that you can kind of have a level playing field when asking for quotes and solicitations for products and services. IR top 10, you're going to see that this is going to morph into that presentation, or this is presentations morphing into that product as we speak. As of May 2015, which is where we're at now, this product is alive and well and kicking. We have a bunch of people working on it right now and producing some guidance. I'm also doing some stuff with the International Legal and Technology Association, ILTA, and this will also be available for folks to take a look at, which will be how to respond to an incident. So enough about OWASP, right? There's a ton of stuff there to take a look at independently of this presentation. So if we dive into some of the technical places to start, areas that you want to focus on in your environment today, tactically, is come up with a list of areas that you want to go ahead and check out and figure out sort of where you're at as a baseline, and then build from there, right? Assuming that your web application is public facing, assuming that you're an Apache user, right? Should that instance be running as root? Definitely not, right? So how do you quickly establish that? Maybe you haven't worked in the company that long. Maybe you've only been there a few months and you now are slowly getting integrated into the environment. Well, perhaps a good thing to do is to quickly determine, what has past third parties or past employees or current employees maybe put in place without best practice. Start looking at the permissions in the web root, right? Look at how things are set up and determine, how the root directories are actually structured. If you don't need access, remove it, right? Lower your attack surface, and of course, always update, to the most appropriate level when possible. Server-side includes, there's really not a good use in many cases for that, but folks typically leave them on. Again, from an attacker perspective, these are all things that are giving me the opportunity to kind of jump into the environment or be able to leverage. The more the defender is insecure, the better it is for the attacker, right? So it's a spy versus spy sort of game. So these are kind of suggestions to put things forward so that you can go ahead and start removing the attack surface. There's components that you can utilize today to start going ahead and removing access and start sort of paring it down. Again, establishing a baseline, establishing what you would determine as a good image or a gold build, or lots of terminologies used, but you want to have something you have faith in. Something as simple as PHP is being run in many locations for many reasons, whether it be a simple marketing website, or perhaps you're building some custom prototype code that's going to be used and all of a sudden becomes production. But being able to go in and harden even PHP is one of those conversations that where do you start, what do you do, and where's the best place to look? So again, go back to CIS, go back to OWASP, and look for the guidance that's there, and look for the guidance from folks that have done this before you. Install mod security. I'm a big fan of mod security. I used to work with Brian Barnett, and I really know that he's passionate about that project. And mod security is a good project at OWASP for the core rule set. So it's a good place to start, not because it's a web application firewall and meets 11.3 of the PCI compliance rules, but because not every organization has the ability. Not every organization has the ability that when they are identified of a breach, when they're identified of a potential problem in their code, not every one of them has the ability to push code in 2 hours. Not everyone has the ability to push code in 5 hours or even 30 days. It's not uncommon to see an environment that has had a quote-unquote an assessment, whether it be a third-party scan or a dedicated sort of test, that has found problems in a particular include or a particular application space, but is unable to actually fix the code because they just don't have the people, or they don't have the skill set, or they don't have the budget. So, WAFs work great in those scenarios. They also help do traffic analysis and things of that nature. But being able to quickly understand where you're at is kind of important. Verifying your directory browsing is disabled, right? Something as simple as that can give away sort of details or data that you didn't expect. What if there's archives or backups happening? And I'm assuming that that's a randomization of a backup name, but maybe not. Maybe it's backup123.zip. And being able to grab that, download it, and figure out, wow, this was an unencrypted backup of the database. Wow, I now have keys to the kingdom. Looking at the different components for even attacking, right? Double code encoding attacks is a simple discussion of being able to encode and then re-encode to be able to fire across the wire. And surprisingly, when you look at things at scale, how many organizations out of 1,000 fall victim to these problems? The percentages are way over 25%, because you're hitting a lot of folks in different ways that they may not expect. Again, getting punched in the face. Who doesn't run MySQL, or at least cut their teeth on it? Being able to understand, kind of where the file permissions are, that no anonymous users exist, and also being able to look and being able to disable access within files that are going to be part of the config file. If you didn't think about it, if you didn't design it to be secure, then you basically have designed it to let anybody walk through the front door, right? So trying to go ahead and up your game is critically important.
And really, if you look at the tens of millions of Muslims that are living in Europe, North America in total,
Sorry about that. Let's get back to the slides. We had a little bit of a disruption. I apologize. I was watching a video before about social media and terrorism, which is a very interesting topic to me. And I found that the video decided to restart in the middle of my presentation. That's kind of funny. So anyhow, so let's go ahead and up our game a little bit, right? So from our status of looking at tools like even Oracle, the concept of being able to jump into the environment and understand sort of where you're at and exactly what you can do there is critically important as well. being able to look at the exact user set and how it's running, certainly in the accounts with passwords, and being able to harden your environment. These things are all critically important. When you build your environments, of course, building it on a solid platform with a minimal attack surface is critical. Bastille Linux has been, a well-known way to approach this problem for quite some time. But more importantly, you have the ability to roll back, which I think is important as you are testing in your environment. And I hope people are doing testing in their dev. Being able to, again, establish what the history locations look like, being able to establish, if people are able to fire off additional cron jobs without access is kind of important. Being able to look at your network connections, right? Looking from your devices and figure out, well, what connections are we listening on, or what ports are open? The idea is being able to think more like the attacker from a hardening perspective, because the evil boogeyman that breaches an organization tomorrow has taken the time probably to look at systems that you're using, because he's went to your website. Perhaps he's went ahead and looked at your job postings. Perhaps he's went ahead and reviewed them and found out that, wow, they're an Oracle shop. They do some stuff on MySQL. They're looking for developers that have backgrounds in JavaScript and Java, and they're looking to do various projects that are out there. The point of it is that your intelligence that's leaked to the general public, this is where attackers' first step is, right? So hardening is definitely needs to be part of your game, but again, keep in mind that it's a holistic discussion about what's being publicly exposed. The easiest way to start securing your Windows installations, right, is certainly Microsoft's done a great job with some of their tools. They've released, it seems like, new stuff just about probably about every year now. But there's a lot of great items that are available to you today. If you're not familiar with the tools, well, either grab a cup of coffee and figure it out, or it's time to try to look for new staff that can help come in and kind of help quickly get you up to speed. It's not difficult for folks to use like SIG Verify to verify the integrity of the system files that are there, that they haven't been sort of recompiled or backdoored, which has been a problem for some organizations in the past. Checking your Windows startup folders and registry keys. Again, back to the point of knowing where your problems may lie. By simply having remote access or even null sessions to the devices allows people to kind of probe and kind of establish sort of where they want to go within the environment fairly quickly. So again, basis of a reactive defense, right, is if you're watching for noise and you're hoping that hopefully you have a data collector like a SIM or something that's pulling things together. But in many cases, if it's not tuned properly, it'll never be green, because it's always going to be red, because you really haven't gone ahead and looked at the things you need to look at. Large organizations, small organizations, individuals, managed service providers, there's all different types of organizations that are out there providing assistance in this space. But I've also had the opportunity to even look at some of those organizations. And I'm sometimes surprised at a managed services company. I'm like, hey, so what are you really doing for your clients? Are you doing just log correlation and combing through logs? Or are you doing something else? When you see 300 403 errors, what exactly do you do? What's your run book here? What's your process? And again, if you have some folks on your team that understand sort of what it looks like when an attack may happen, those are really the best people to send out to look at your third-party providers, to ask those hard questions as to what can I expect when this happens? And if you can't get a straight answer, you probably should go look down the road. When we start looking at other interesting findings in an environment, being able to rip through systems, be able to pull information. Again, even your log files sometimes are going to cough up data. So having that information to be secured or a good chain of custody is always important, because even if your log data was to be able to be accessed, perhaps there's going to be information in there like a failed logout attempt that's now in clear text in a log that would give an attacker a hint as to what a password sequence is. If you also look at the public-facing survey of what you have set up, this would greatly aid you in being more defensible, meaning defensible to an attack. Probably not defensible in court, but certainly defensible to an attack. If you don't know what your public exposure looks like, you'll probably find out after the fact of a breach that there was a incident response that took place, and those investigators had taken the time to trace things back to root cause. And what they found that perhaps there was an opportunity because again, some public-facing information was there up on like Pastebin from one of your developers that was communicating with an offshore resource on trying to quickly resolve something. Again, keep an eye on what is being indexed about you. Do your best to do some sort of reconnaissance program within your organization. I think that internal security and hardening systems and operations is exactly that, operational security. But there also needs to be sort of a component of third-party sort of social awareness in that environment as well. If you don't know what you have and you don't know where it is and you don't know what it's connected to, and you're in one of those scenarios that the organization's getting bigger, lots of different groups or different departments or maybe a merger and acquisition, you can bet your weak point is going to be the problem that is laid out in front of you on a visual. Meaning, what does DNS tell you about your environment? What does that email address that's associated with one domain name? What is that domain name? What is that email address associated with what other domains? How is it using different name servers? What else is on that name server? What else is on that shared hosting box that you're using for a marketing exercise? By compartmentalizing these systems, by looking at the risk profiles, by not commingling data based on different data classifications, it becomes an exercise, right? This is not complex. This is just a well thought out discussion around where do you start? And then how do you back into it? If you walked into a new environment tomorrow, you probably would try to start off with a best practice. And sometimes I would also recommend re-architecting the environment, meaning write up what the best practice would look like and do your best to migrate to it. So therefore, you can always have a plan of saying, this is what I inherited. This is definitely not good. Single point of failure. I'm going to start moving this over to another location because of these valuable points. Again, keep in mind that the attacker, unlike yourself, is focused on the risk of incarceration, not the return on investment. They're focused on trying to not get caught. They're trying to maximize their return as quickly as possible without having people kick in the door and flashbang the room. The discussion here is that whether it be anyone in the world for any particular purpose, whether it be geopolitical, whether it be activism, whether it be, save the puppies from chemical testing, whatever it may be, organizations are at least conscious of the attack vectors are in front of them, meaning who they think their attackers are. And if they are truly random opportunistic, it's kind of like the concept of, and again, excuse the blatancy here, but if I was to walk out of my house and walk down the street in Manhattan and just randomly shoot somebody, I might have a better chance of escaping because there's no ties, there's no connection, there's no connectivity to that individual that's in my profile or in my social centrality analysis. There's no one that's going to associate themselves with why this bad guy was there. So if you're facing random opportunistic attackers, people that are harvesting system data from you, you will have probably a harder attack. You'll have a harder time to identify them and stop them, of course, than if you've established that you have certain adversaries that you want to be aware of. Hence, when you conduct your mark exercises, when you conduct your reviews, you want to go ahead and start looking at that in that respect, meaning create some environments that are useful. So I always recommend that organizations do a very simple thing, which is tomorrow is the worst day possible. Tomorrow is the day that you learn that the system that you rely on heavily in your organization has failed. Tomorrow you learn that there was a black truck that was seen driving away from the system administrator's office with a bag full of garbage, and you don't know what's in it because you weren't shredding everything, or whatever scenario you want to come up with. When you come up with these scenarios, the concept is that you're going to be able to quickly be able to determine what your attackers are going to look like, because that's exactly what's being asked now from your board of directors. The board of directors of most organizations have savvy people on the board that are now concerned with the shareholders' ability to continue to invest in the company. If it's a privately held organization, well, there's probably still folks that represent the board, but these are the type of questions that you want to ask yourself, and you want to see if you have the answers for them, because these are the ones that you're going to have to respond to. Which threats are focused on our business, and why? Why are these the ones that are most important, right? What's connected? Who are the most critical services, and who runs them? Is there a formalized response process? Well, everybody talks about breaches in the news every day. Well, what is the cost to reissue cards for your organization? What is the cost to do your letter of your letter out to the affected parties? What happens when it's an insider and you have to go ahead and take internal damage control with politics and HR processes? You fire a bunch of people, they leave the company, and quote unquote a time bomb goes off in the business, and one of your systems suffers a catastrophic failure. What industry enforcement relationships are in place? Are the people in your organization spending the time with people from like HTCIA or InfraGard or Secret Service outreach programs? Are you involved in the OWASP organization? Do you have those relationships already built up that you might be able to reach out for and ask for assistance or help, again, in a trusted way? There's no better phone call that a vendor likes than 4 o'clock on a Friday when they say, I think I'm breached, because that price just went up quite a bit. So again, establishing those relationships ahead of time, running through those scenarios would certainly limit the loss. And any executive in the space now can understand, especially a COO, can understand a little bit of insurance can go a long way. A little bit of insurance can go a long way. Keep in mind that cyber insurance policies now are also getting a little more complex, where there's a few organizations, I work with a few of them, that before they're going to issue a cyber insurance policy on what you say you have, you're going to have to do an attestation, right, a self-assessment. And then after the self-assessment is submitted, you're then going to be reviewed to determine if that organization wants to issue your policy. Well, in some cases, they're then going to enact, or they're going to reach out to third parties. They're going to have organizations conduct an assessment of your business to determine, did you do the things you said you do? And then more importantly, perhaps you need to provide a letter of attestation. So depending on what environment or regulations that you fall under, these things can be quite complex. So keep in mind the last thing on the list here is, have we conducted a mock exercise, internal or external, with or without third party, and are you ready to fight? With that, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope this presentation at least invoked some conversation and invoked some ideas. The presentation is available. It is recorded. I will be sending out a link to the folks that had RSVP'd for the event, and you also find that on the Proactive Risk website. So with that, I'm going to take a quick look for any questions we may have. And one question I have here is, how often should organizations conduct web application security testing? Well, I think this might be an interesting answer. You're not ever going to hack yourself secure, right? If you were to test your web application every single day, it's not going to help you become more secure in your environment. You're going to have a lot of results, perhaps. But what's more important here is to go ahead and have a risk management program. Being able to start looking at sort of what's important to the business, and be able to go ahead and put these things in the categorization buckets. Again, remember the ASVS that I spoke about earlier for web application security. Good place to start. First, understand what you have, put it into the associated brand buckets, because there's never enough budget, people, or money to get jobs done. We got to start figuring out more of a risk classification model to help the business. I hope that answers your question. Second question here is, are they more secure? Let me see. Are you more secure using a remote access solution like a vendor SSL solution or a remote desktop solution? Okay, I get it. So the question really is it more secure to use a SSL remote solution or like an RDP, like a Microsoft RDP? In that scenario, they're both going to be as equally vulnerable. And let me explain why. From an availability perspective, anything that's public facing to the internet potentially can have a denial of service against it. So if you have a remote desktop connection running, let's say, a port 3389 public facing to the internet, and you have an authentication, your username and password, you may very well have that device knocked offline or flooded because they're trying to stop you from using that remote access. That's a technique that a lot of folks would use if you're under attack. If you're SSL VPN, although I love the concept and I've worked on a bunch of great tools, remember this. There's businesses that their entire mission is now decentralized, right? Businesses or agencies that they have everybody come through a concentrator. Well, same thing holds true. If I can DOS that SSL VPN, I can knock the entire agency or knock the entire group of decentralized employees offline. That could be interesting. But secondly, it's also limiting here, right? If you're only going to have single-factor authentication to those devices, you've also put yourself at another disadvantage. Two-factor authentication for remote access is a requirement. Say it. You want to go ahead and get rid of passwords as quickly as possible. Do your best to use out-of-band management, remote access with a PIN number getting passed to a cell phone. These things are not foolproof, and circumvention of these tools is possible. But again, you need to take your challenge by saying, okay, what's the bare minimum I got to do? If you're still doing RDP with a name and password to access your environment to reboot your domain controller, you have some problems. You have some serious risks that you're willing to deal with. Many folks just aren't that happy to deal with that anymore. So we are at the end of our time here. If you do have any more questions, please feel free to kick me an email. Follow me on Twitter. I'm constantly talking about something, most recently my new puppies. But I hope this has been enjoyable or at least insightful to you. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much.